Hey everybody, this is Jeff with the Embroidery Nerd, and we are in video number 3 of our DG16 Pulse in the Composer level. Now, what we're planning on talking about and covering today is going to be our user settings. We'll talk a little bit about the customized tools, and I'm going to show you guys the user settings that I like to use, and I'll explain why. So let's go ahead and get this started. So we have here our general user settings. So right now the language is English. My company name I went ahead and put in there. The cost per 1,000 stitches. Now if you guys are looking for a really good pricing video, we did a 3-part series on that. You can figure out what your cost per stitches is. I'm going to change that to $1.50. Then we have our quick draw, our default end lock. These are the different lines. We'll talk more about the locks later. And then save images in PXF files. Now, if you select to save images in PXF file, if you bring in artwork for backwards and you save the image inside of the PXF file, it will make your native file larger. And so if you're concerned about large file sizes, then you may not want to have that checked. Okay. Next up is going to be our environment. All right. We have our autosave timer. I do like to have the autosave. It goes in and it saves it every 10 minutes. So if the software crashes and I forget to save, that'll be taken care of there. So we have our mouse wheel behavior. We can change it from zoom in and out, which is what it's set by default, to scroll up and down or left and right, or we can set it to none. I like to leave it at scroll in and out. This will give us the rate that we can increase. So if we want to slow down that zoom, we can do that as well, and we can swap the zoom direction. All right. Manual start and stop is turned off. I can turn that on, and then when I'm digitizing an object, it'll ask me where I want to place my start point and my end point. So by default, that's left off, and in the Composer level of Pulse, I wouldn't use that very much, so I would just say that you can leave that as default. You can activate auto panning. This is nice when you're digitizing and you get close to the edge of the line, it'll move. It's a feature that other softwares have, and it's really nice so that you can just kind of bump the edge and go. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. It really depends on what you like. It's something definitely to explore with. Okay. You've got your automatic handle displays. You can show handles when editing vertices, so that'll give you like your curve lines that you can go in and you can edit those curve lines, and that's what'll show there. You can automatically reset styles. I'll leave that the same. I don't go in and change that. I will just let it keep the same style I was using from the last time. Okay, we can change right click to complete segments. This is something that I believe is default, and I turn it off. I like for my right click to put a curve node and my left click to put a cusp node. I hope I said that right. And so to complete segments, I prefer to use the enter key, and so I change that there. Okay, generate icons when necessary. It'll do that automatically. We don't need to worry about that. Enable outline selection with angle line tool. That'll allow us to select the outline when we're entering in an angle line. That's not something that I necessarily change, but it is an option that is in there. Okay. Auto start and stop when converting segments. I tend to leave that checked. I want it to set the start and stop points automatically when I'm converting segments. I can go in there and edit them afterwards if I need to. Okay. And fit to window after pasting a segment. That is, if we take a segment and we paste it, it's going to fit the segment to the full size of the windows. I don't like that. I like when I paste the segment that it just is where I want it to be. Okay. Edit angle lines with selection tool. So that's nice when you want to edit the angle lines along with the vertices. So you can leave that there. Enable outline selection with vertex select tool. I leave that as well, and preserve sequence when converting segments. So that is if you convert a segment and it's digitized in a direction that's opposite of what you want it to be, then it'll preserve that sequence. I leave that left undone. We have our display. We can have our stitch point size. So if I wanted to make my stitch points look brighter, I can do that. I can change my stitch point color. Default windows to launch from the ribbon, the properties window, the segment settings dialog. I like it to be the properties window. Show crosshair cursor. This is something that I really like to use, is the crosshairs over the mouse. So when I'm digitizing, I can actually see exactly where I'm putting it. I don't have to worry about the stuff behind the mouse that I can't see. Okay, and I leave the draw crosshairs when moving segments. I leave that enabled. And show contents when dragging. I leave that check highlighted as well. You can also highlight the object when you select it. I don't deal with that. And you can have show ribbon, slow redraw ribbon shown by default. And that's, again, it's a button that's up here, so you don't necessarily need to have that. Okay. You can fade background on segment select. That's if I selected a segment, it's going to kind of fade everything else. You can use flyout toolbars, and this is one that we're going to talk about a little bit, and use ribbon interface. So we'll talk about these two just a little bit. The ribbon interface is up here on the top, and that's what we're using right now. I've found that I like to use the ribbon interface. You can turn it off if you want to. It'll change the complete look of the software. The other one is use flyout tools. So the flyout tools are these here, and we showed earlier how you would click and you would hold and it would fly out with the different options. If we unselect the flyout toolbars, okay, and we hit OK, it's going to say to restart the software to take effect. So we'll go ahead and close that. No, I'm not going to save that design. I'm not going to save that design, and I will get it started back up here. And we'll wait while it loads just a second. It actually loads really, really fast, which is something that I like. And we go into new design here. Now you can see that all of my selection options that were previously in a flyout menu are now buttons. So I don't have to go and try and figure out, okay, well, what flyout menu is it under? It now shows me all of the buttons that, that were inside the flyout menus. And if you have the real estate to work with it, I personally like this because it's a lot easier for me to go, okay, well, there's the button I need, versus trying to go, what menu is it under? Now, if you don't have the real estate on your screen for it, I'd recommend doing the flyout menus, but just know from probably this point forward, I'm going to be using it like this because this is something that I prefer for the environment that I digitize in, okay? And that's set there. Now our display colors, this is going to be the colors that it's going to show, you know, our background color. If I wanted to change it to a light gray, I could change it to a light gray. I can change the colors there, okay? Let's get back here into the environment and display colors. So if I wanted to change that, I can change that there. Now our warnings will go to here. It's show warning when fonts are not available upon opening a design. I think that's important. Show warning when stitch changes will be lost due to an outline edit. I also think that is important. Show warning when stitch changes will be lost due to stitch to outline conversion. So that is if you're taking a machine file, which is stitches, and you're converting it to an outline object, you may lose some of the stitches. Due to that, that is something that you can add there if you want to. I don't think it hurts, but again, it's kind of personal preference. Now, show warning when stitches created by stitch to outline conversion will be lost due to outline editing. We can check that as well. These are basically, it'll just pop up. It'll say, hey, this is what's going to happen. You can hit OK, or you can cancel the change that you were trying to make. Okay. We have our shortcuts. So for people that have been using this software longer, in 2010, many of the keyboard shortcuts change, and that's what it says here. So there are the standard shortcuts. They'll be assigned by default. If you use software that had the shortcuts that were 2009 earlier, they're what they call the classic shortcuts, and you can apply those shortcuts to all your buttons and stuff. So if you are coming from an older version of Pulse and you want to utilize the shortcuts that you know and remember, you can change those here, okay? And then open stitch file. This is what it's going to do when you open a stitch file, like a machine file, DST, something that doesn't have outlines. You can tell it, you know, I want you to open it as stitched segments, because sometimes when it goes in and tries to open a complex object, it won't quite know how to break it apart, and it can cause issues. So you can just say, you know what, I want you to take the stitches that are in the file and throw them in on my screen. You can convert those segments to outlines, so it'll take the objects that are there and it'll try to go, okay, well, this is what the outlines need to be, and it'll allow you to do a little bit more editing to a DST file if you use this, but the results can vary based off of the design, so it's something that you need to pay attention to when you're doing it. And I always just say, remember the previous setting. And that's worked out well for me so far, so that's what I would keep it. Now we have our file locations. Okay, this is where it's going to keep our applique fabrics, our designs. This is where it's storing the fonts, garments, the styles, thread database, artwork. This is where it's storing all of that information. So if you're ever wondering, hey, you know, I saved a file, where is it going to be? This is where those are, and you can change those file locations if you want to. We don't really have anything in the advanced. We can go to our print, so we can print as outline, stitches, both. We can print the actual size. We can scale it, fit it to page. These are the settings that you're going to get here. Our images, we can hide the jumps if we have going to have jump stitches. We can hide crosshairs. These are all the different options that we can do when we actually print an image. We can do our worksheets. So this is what we can add to a worksheet. Now, remember how it said estimate cost that was there? I can uncheck that box, and now it's not going to show on the run sheet when I put it out. I can add that. I can set the recipe name. So if I'm using a recipe and I like it, then I can have it displayed on that sheet, and I can save it and go from there. I can also mark, the who that I assigned it in the software, the creation date. So all of this information can be added, and you can even print design notes on a full page. Next up, we go into our font. These are the fonts that it's going to use for the print page. So when you go and print your run sheet, right now it's Arial font, and it's 3 of 9 extended, regular 24, and we can do the barcode font as well, but that's what that is. And then we have our barcode list, so we can do our barcode based off of our design folder, our design queue, number of designs, file information. This is the stuff that we'll have on there. I don't use a barcode. If you guys are running a production environment where you're using a barcode, this is going to be a lot more condoned, and you're gonna want to run through these just a little bit more and make sure that you're getting what you need. Now we have our text. So this is our default bridge rise, so it's going to be 25% of the default bridge. We can display all fonts, or we can hide old fonts. So there are some fonts that are a lot older that you can't do as many things to and manipulate as much, and you can have it display that, or you can have it hide the older fonts and just leave it there. We can also change the spacing based off of the number of characters. I don't really mess with these in the settings area. I'll do that more when I'm actually editing the object versus set it up as a default setting. Next, we have our Melco condense. So this is our default density for a Melco condensed file. We can use our average fill angle, or we can use the angle of the first line. And this is just going to be how a Melco machine is going to be reading the file. So if you're not running Melcos, then this is not going to, or creating files for Melcos, then this is not going to really do that much for you. Next up, we have our stitch generation. Now, this is something that I actually use and I change. So I have my default design density. That's something I don't really mess with. I check these boxes: generate stitches after node edit, generate stitches after editing an envelope, generate stitches after editing beads, and generate stitches after editing slice lines. And that means when I make an edit, it's going to instantly do the edit, and I'm not going to have to wait, or I'm not going to have to hit the G key to generate. I might still in a rare occurrence, but this is going to make it automatically generate those stitches. And if you have a more powerful computer, then it can handle this, and you don't have to worry about generating the stitches to see the reflection of your change on the screen. If you don't have these checked and you make a change, it's not going to update right away, and you're going to have to hit the G key to generate the stitches. Next up, we have our drawing, our stitch extension, highlight stitch shorter than 2 points, highlight stitch longer than 120 points. So the point is 2 points is 0.2 millimeters, and 120 points is 12 millimeters. Now, what this is going to do for us is if our stitches are too short to be sewn, or our stitches are too long to be shown, it's going to highlight them. And that's what that is set up for. So moving on, we've got our units. So our units of measure can be in imperial. So if we go to actually measure something, it can be in inches. And we can use our millimeters. We can use points or inches. So if I use millimeters, it's 0.2, let's say a 0.4 density. If I use points, it's going to say 0.4 or 4 points. And if I use inches, I don't even want to do the conversion because that's not something I do. I learned in millimeters when I digitized, so I use that in millimeters. Now, again, this is density here. So we have our millimeters, points, or stitch per inch, and we have absolute density, which I leave checked. Our Draw Fusion, this is going to be when adding artwork from Draw Fusion. We can tell it to convert fills, shapes. We can tell it to convert runs, steals. We can treat outlines as thick when thickness is more than. And, we can specify that thickness there. Transaction objects from Draw Fusion. We can do the selection only. We can resynchronize. We can change this. So this is more of our Draw Fusion when we go in and start importing PDFs and stuff, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. and we'll definitely go a lot more in depth into it when we start getting into the higher levels of pulse. Next up, we have our default thread palette. So my default thread chart is the Madeira CL40, which is the Madeira Classic 40. I use their polyneon, but I have this set, so I could change this to Madeira Polyneon 40 and my default chart to Madeira Polyneon 40 right there. And so now it's going to default to the polyneon down across the bottom. Next up, we have our file associations. So these are going to be the file associations that when you open the file explorer, if it's a DST, DSB, JEF, these are going to be the ones. If I check these boxes, it's going to show me that, hey, this is a Pulse file from the Windows Explorer. I leave the Pulse by itself. If your only embroidery software is Pulse, then I would check all of those as well so that it knows that it's a default file association. If not, just the PXF is fine. And you can also tell it to check for missing file associations on the startup. Next up, we go into our performance. We're going to go into our render. My render is going to be software. I can enable anti-aliasing, and I don't do that. My graphics card can support it, but I like to leave this stuff just default. And then, of course, multi-core. You can limit the number of cores it's allowed to use, or you can just let it decide that by there. And I leave mine on automatic. Finally, we have our machines. This is, if you're running a Tajima machine, you can actually go in here and you can say, I want my lower dead point here. I want my lower dead point, my FB lower dead point there. I can do a fixed stroke. I can set the timing, and I can make some of the changes here that will follow the file onto the machine and make the changes there. So if you don't have a Tajima machine, you can just leave those blank. And of course, whenever you make a change, it's going to tell you need to restart the software to enable your changes. So it's a good idea to make all of those changes at once when you go in there. Next up, we can customize. Again, this is our commands. So we have new, open, merge, and our categories that we can go into. We have our librarian, open design. I don't go into those too much, but we can move those. It tells us what each one of those buttons does. So we can see that there. We can also hit the little question mark on there. And it should have popped up to help. It didn't, but that's okay. We'll just keep on going. We can go to our toolbars, and you can see the toolbars that we have active, and I can add, a toolbar, or I can remove a toolbar if I want to. I just leave those, all of them checked. We have our keyboard. So here we can go into our edit tools, and we can say our add characters, and we can check. And if we find, we'll go into the file here, and when we get into the file, close, open, file save, you can see here this file save, it has a keyboard shortcut. We can assign a new keyboard shortcut to any one of these actions. So if we need a keyboard shortcut for something that we're using a lot, we can actually do that here, and we can save that shortcut. We also have our set accelerator for design thread chart. I just leave it at default. It's not something I go in and change a lot. Finally, we have our menus. We have show menus for, and we have all of these here. I just use the default menu, and you can always reset it if you need to. I use the default menu animations. There we go. Instead of changing these do a little bit more. It's just something graphically, visually that you can look at, and I don't change a lot of that because I don't really need the graphic stimulation that I've done something. You can also turn off your menu shadows. I don't really bother with that. And then you can select your context menu, and this is for a laser field. If you have a laser, then that's going to be something that you're going to want to look at, but I'm going to guess that the most of us don't. So if you need more into that, you can definitely check into the manual. So now we have our toolbar, shows screen tips on toolbars. So this is when you hover over a toolbox, it's going to give you that, here's the shortcut. This is what the button does. We can make large icons. Not a big fan of having massively large icons, but it is something that you can go in there and change if you have the screen real estate. And then I can do my menu show recently used commands first, show full menu name full menus after a short delay. So that's something that you can do there, and I can also reset my usage data. And that is going to go over, and it really bumped all these, so I can move my menu buttons around. There's these 3 dots right here, and I can move my menus back because when I made them large, it just kind of reshifted everything. So if I zoom in here on this, you guys can see it a little bit better. It's just 3 little dots right there, and I can just select it and move my menus around. I can move them. I can set a new line, and I should be able to drop them here on the right side. For some reason, it's not letting me, but that could be just because of the way I've got the pointer highlighted there. So we can go ahead and move these here. We've got our start and stop icon. You can also have them floating. I don't necessarily use them floating. I like to keep them docked, but it is something that you can have out there as well. So I'll go ahead and turn off the magnifier. And that pretty much concludes the layout settings that I like to use and the general settings that I like to use that we can use to customize our interface and allow us to navigate the software more easily. If you guys like this video, you can feel free to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also join the Embroidery Nerd group on Facebook and ask your questions there, as well as you can follow us on theembroiderynerd.com. We have a Discord channel as well that you can talk to us and the rest of the embroidery nerds. You can find all that at links.embnerd.com. Thank you guys for hanging out with me, and we'll go ahead and move on.